Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Saturdays and Stores podcast, which you can find, as always, right here on the Crossover channel. I'm your host, Kanaye, and today I originally had a different plan in mind. It's in terms of the theme that I was going to do for this video, and then kind of out of the blue, on the morning of Monday, August 18th, UConn got two commitments unexpectedly back to back within the span of 30 minutes. I want to say two international prospects, Rrezon Elezaj and Uroš Paunović. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your names wrong. I'm sure once they kind of get acclimated with getting to stores and being with the team for a little bit of while, we'll see some more media introductions for those guys, and we'll learn the correct ways to pronounce their names. But again, definitely something that was a little bit unexpected. The NCAA did increase the roster limit for scholarship players to 15, which is why I believe Dan Hurley and his staff decided to go ahead and recruit these guys from the international ranks and bring them over. I think overall just to add a little bit more depth in some certain areas, which I definitely think you can never get enough of, and added depth is always a good thing. But that's basically what I'm going to be breaking down in this episode today. But before we get into that, if you like this podcast or anything else you see on the Crossover channel, please engage with our videos in any way you can, whether it's liking, subscribing to our channel, or just telling other people about what we do at the Crossover. Really just goes a long way with influencing YouTube's algorithm, getting more people to watch our videos. So let's get right into it. Again, on the morning of Monday, August 18th, UConn landed both Rrezon Elezaj and Uroš Paunović. And again, it's kind of something that you didn't really expect coming just because of how we think the depth is really kind of coming together for this roster already as it was before adding these two guys. I think you had great depth within your guards, what you have on the wing. Center, I think definitely was maybe somewhere where you needed a little extra added depth, just considering that you really only have Terrace and Eric to turn to. Now you're bringing in Raison into the fold here, where he is a legit 7'2". But Dan Hurley had some good things to say about both these prospects. I'm going to talk a little bit about what he mentioned in the comments he made when he was reached out to regarding landing both those guys. But I guess we'll start with Raison since I mentioned him already. So again, he's 7'2". He's Albanian, I believe, but he did play in one of the Turkish leagues. Most recently, he played for Besiktas in the Turkey U19 league, which is where he most recently played. In that league, he averaged 7.6 points per game, 5.8 rebounds, 1.6 blocks on 20 minutes per game. Shot 60.7% from the field. Pretty solid efficiency down low there. And I definitely think he's someone that's kind of being brought in to be more of a developmental piece for future years. He is someone who just turned 18, which is one of the reasons Dan Hurley mentioned as to why they felt it was valuable to bring him into the program. But in terms of what he had to say about Raison, he just said, again, a true 7-footer, really young, someone who's going to be able to develop for however long he ends up staying with the program, several years, I would assume. Again, I think he's probably going to end up being in kind of what was like a Yusuf Sangari role, where he's the third center big man off the bench. Just when you're ever in the case you're ever in a scenario where one, Terrace is in foul trouble, Eric is also in foul trouble, you don't really have too many people to turn to. Kind of like what we saw this past year, where Sampson, Terrace, they got into foul trouble in several games, like against Gonzaga, where Sampson had the concussion and Terrace got in foul trouble early, or against Texas, when both those guys, Sampson and Terrace, got in foul trouble, and you had to see Yusuf play some extended minutes in. But again, I definitely think it's good to have a third string big, just someone you can definitely fall back on if the situation arises where you absolutely need Elizaj to be on the court. But Hurley also had to say he has really solid instincts and timing as a shot blocker, which I think is really important. Of course, being a 7-footer and being disciplined, not fouling when you don't need to, and being able to time when you go up to try to block a shot and not falling for head fakes. That's something that's really, really important. And if he brings that to the table, then I think that's going to be really crucial for what could be any minutes he sees this year, and of course what the program is going forward in terms of their situation at the center. But outside of that, Hurley talked about him being a legit lob threat and someone who could be really good in being a threat in ball screen scenarios, where he's going to roll towards the basket, get into the lane, into the painted area. But outside of that, he has experience again playing in the Turkish youth leagues, and pretty nothing that blows you away stats wise, but I definitely think the percentages that he shot from the floor were definitely encouraging in terms of what you could try to map out as a potential ceiling for what he could end up being at UConn. But overall, I'm pretty high on the get. Again, I think it was important getting a little bit more added depth at center, just considering you bring in Dwayne Caroma, who is one of the bigs He's 6'7", maybe 6'8". I forget off the top of my head, but again, that's not really center height. It's not someone, don't want to put someone in a situation where they're 6'7", 6'8", having to play center down low. I know UConn in the past has turned Alex Caravan to play small ball five, and I'm sure we might end up seeing that a little bit this year as well. And I could definitely see Dwayne Karoma also getting some minutes at the five too. But again, I think it's always great to add another 7-footer into the fold. He's going to be someone who can continue to push the other guys who might be playing more in practice. It's harder to go up and try to finish over a 7-footer. So now that they have two to go up against every single day of practice between Eric Ryba and now Rrezon Elezaj, then I think that's really good. It's going to do a lot for developing the finishing skills that some of the guards and wings are going to need for this upcoming year in the Big East. Now to get into Uroš Paunović. Uroš Paunović, I think, is probably the more exciting of the two prospects in terms of immediate impact. He's a 22-year-old coming over from Serbia, and he has a lot of experience playing in a lot of professional basketball. He most recently in 24-25 season played with KK Zlatibor. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that team's name wrong. He played in 11 games in the Adriatic League 2 before he was elevated into playing into the top flight league over there in Serbia. And he started in 30 games, I believe I saw, and he averaged around, I think it was 9 points and added like 3 rebounds, I believe like 2 assists as well. So he's someone who brings a little bit of a kind of crafty game. He's someone who can dribble. He's solid in handling the ball. Dan Hurley talked about it when commenting about Yuros. He said that's someone that they really liked the film that they were able to watch on in terms of when they were recruiting these two guys from overseas. He mentioned the experience he has. He mentioned he has great size, being at 6'3", but or 6'4". I think he's 6'4". Forget off the top of my head, so I apologize. Again, around 6'4", a solid frame, pretty solid as a ball handler, can shoot, solid passer, and he brings a lot of energy, which I think is really, really important. You need more guys this year to kind of emerge as some of the dogs and have that kind of Cam Spencer, Andre Jackson energy that the last year's team really, really lacked. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that this year. And not just coming from Yuros, but just among all guys on the team. I think this year there's going to be a lot more energy on the floor, a lot more passion and desire and will to just do everything it takes to put it all on the line and try to win some basketball games this year. But again, bringing someone who's going to bring high energy and competitiveness to the table is really important for not only just having that on the game floor, but being able to push the other guys in practice, hold others accountable, make really force others to elevate their games to match the level of energy that everyone's playing to. I think that's crucial and it's important. That's what Dan Hurley's built this UConn culture on since he's gotten 2 stores, and adding another player who brings that same type of energy, it's going to be great. And I'm excited to see if that really does have an impact on the rest of the guys. Outside of that, it's really interesting because I'm not all too sure how much he is going to play, because you need to remember that we've already talked about how loaded this UConn backcourt and wing situation is right now. I mean, in the guard room, you already have Silas Demery Jr., Malachi Smith, solo ball, Braylon Mullins, if you call him a guard, could also see him playing out on the wing. I mean, Jay Ross, Jay Stu, Caravan, Karoma's there, Jacob Furphy. It's a lot. It's a crowded backcourt wing room there. And again, this is a kid who is, well, you can't really call him a kid because he's 22 years old. And he is someone who I'm not sure as to the eligibility status he is coming in with. I don't know if he's being granted the status of a freshman where he's going to have an additional 3 years after this upcoming season to play in college. I would assume probably not. I think the NCAA, it's really kind of been one of the under talked about situations that is becoming really a lot more pronounced in college basketball lately, just with all the international prospects coming from overseas. You see what Illinois has done. You see what UConn's done with, well, getting Jacob Furphy and Eric Ryba, and now adding Raison and Yuros into the mix now. It's interesting because the NCAA really goes kind of case by case with this. You look at Creighton as a great example of Fedor Zugic, what went down last season, where he played professional basketball at the highest level. I believe he was 21 or 22 going into the last season. I forget off the top of my head, but he's probably someone who shouldn't have been deemed eligible, just considering the amount of pro experience he already had. And you didn't know if he was going to be deemed eligible for this upcoming year, but he was. So Fedor Zugic will be with the Creighton program and playing for the Blue Jays this year. So you don't know because, again, Yuros is 22 years old. I would assume he gets maybe another year at most 2 added on top of this upcoming season. So he's a guy that you would think is not really developmental player that you're going to have in your program for the next 3-4 years where he can play out a full college career. Is more someone that I think you're kind of bringing into to win now in a way. And again, I'm not really all too sure how much he's going to play, just considering, again, this backcourt is completely loaded with the guys you already have. I mean, a guy like Jacob Furphy, who a lot of people, including myself, didn't know was going to be this talented coming into UConn. He might end up being like the eighth or ninth man, possibly 10th off the bench. And now you add another guy like Uroš Paunović into the mix, and you just don't know where he fits. Again, I'm really excited in terms of the potential skill sets he brings to the table. I do think the pro experience could potentially give him a little bit of an edge over some of the other younger guys that are already on the roster. I could definitely see a scenario where he does end up getting on the floor. But again, I'm excited to see these guys get to STORRS, see some practice clips go up in terms of what these guys are as a player. And again, I think the depth is it's never bad having too much depth. But outside of that, I guess I'll get into what I originally was gonna have as a theme for this video, just in terms of Hurley had a statement the other day, or maybe not the other day. It was a little, maybe a week ago at this point, where he went on an interview with CBS College Basketball with John Rothstein. Basically, talked about how he definitely sees similarities, or he's beginning to kind of get the feeling that this team going to this season is very, very similar to what he had going into the 22-23 season. He talked about the similarities in depth, the similarities at certain skill sets that guys are bringing at different positions. And this is what I've talked about in the past. I mean, I've talked about it with Josh. I've talked about it on this podcast. Again, I just think the roster construction and kind of the visualization the coaching staff has for what this roster could end up being going to the season is very similar to what it was in terms of how they built their roster up and game plan going into the 22-23 season, where you really go all in on having depth at every position. I mean, these two ads I just talked about for the bulk of this episode continues to add on to the immense depth that I felt this roster already had. Where going into 22-23, you add a lot of guys who, yeah, might not have been stars, might not have been starters, but were incredibly important role pieces that came off the bench, didn't complain, played the roles greatly. Hassan Diarra, you bring in Joey California, Naheem Aline, Samson Johnson is there. I know he dealt with injuries that year, but he had Klingon coming off the bench. And really, it was just incredible the amount of depth they had coming off the bench that year. And I just think that depth really kind of added to the already strong firepower that they had between Adama Sanogo and Jordan Hawkins. Of course, Hawkins could spring off for 3 straight threes at any given moment. It really something that just overwhelmed other teams, considering that you had to deal with those guys in the starting lineup, and then you have capable players coming off the bench like a Naheem Aline, Hassan, and Joey Calcaterra that season, and Klingon as well. I mean, just to see a 7-footer coming off the bench for Adama Sanogo, who was a borderline All-American of the year. I think he was an honorable mention, if not third team. Yeah, that's a tough tandem to deal with. And this year, like I talked about in the last episode, Dan Hurley alluded to how the scenario Eric is in right now, competing against Tarris Reed, is very similar to what Donovan Klingon had to do against Adama Sanogo going into his freshman year at UConn. And I think, again, I've talked to length on how I felt that's a great comparison. And the path line's there for Eric's development to come along nicely, being able to play against the caliber of a player like Tarris. But then you go to Tarris and Adama, I've talked about the comparisons. I definitely think Tarris could be in store for perhaps an Adama-like season. Silas Demery Jr. is going to be in that Tristan Newton role. I've talked about how I think their games are definitely similar in certain aspects. And then you have Solo Ball continuing to hopefully come along and be like another Jordan Hawkins, of course. And while I do think the comparisons are completely valid, I am very for the comparisons, I do think it is important to, I don't know if it's warning is the right word to use here, but I do kind of want to put out a word of caution in these comparisons, where I think very much a lot of times players get a little overwhelmed by comparisons. And I think, yeah, of course we want Silas Demery Jr. to be the next Tristan Newton, but Tristan Newton, you need to remember, was a first-team All-American, Bob Cousy Award winner. He had struggles in his first year at UConn. It didn't come right away. You know, it took a little bit of time. He had to go through that rough January that the program had to endure that season, 22-23. And then by the time of the tournament, you could argue he was the best player on the floor going forward for the rest of his time at UConn. Sanogo, you need to remember, before that year where he broke out for 17 points per game, he averaged 14 the year before that. Tarris Reed averaged 9 this past year and came off the bench. I'm not saying Tarris Reed can't be another Adama, but I do think that just because they're not showing the level of play that the likes of some guys like a Tristan Newton or an Adama Sanogo did right away, then I don't think you can necessarily hold that against them all too harshly. I think it's going to take time. I think that it's important to understand that there's going to be growing pains. This is Terrace's first year starting at UConn this year. Silas Demery's in a completely new system. Jordan Hawkins was a lottery pick. Solo ball actually is pretty spot on in terms of efficiency and volume on three-pointers, but now teams have had a full year of tape to watch on Solo. It's going to be harder for Solo to get off some of the shots I think he got last year. Granted, he was a good shot maker on some three-pointers with a high degree of difficulty. But again, Jordan Hawkins was a lottery pick. He had better size. I think he did a little bit of a better job at having a more of explosive first step and getting to the basket, being able to elevate for some dunks. That's something Solo Ball I know has worked on this offseason. And I'm sure we're going to see a lot more improved Solo Ball and being able to go to the basket and attack closeouts. But again, I just want to put out a little bit of caution where, some of these comparisons that we're mapping out right now for some of the players on this going into the season that are on the roster right now. I just think that, if they're not playing to the level of, again, like a Tristan Newton, Jordan Hawkins, Adama Sanogo, I don't think you need to panic or, lose your cool if those guys aren't playing to the level right away. You got to remember, those three guys are pros. They're all in the NBA now. I just don't know that. Again, I don't think Solo Ball is going to be a lottery pick. I definitely think there's a chance he's a first round pick, but I don't think he's going to crack into the lottery the way Jordan Hawkins did. Silas Demery Jr., there's definitely a world where he can be an All-American and be a candidate for the Bob Cousy Award. But again, it's his first year at UConn. He's probably not going to be the version of Tristan we got in his second year at UConn right away, just considering the roadblock that the UConn point guards always have to endure when picking up Dan Hurley's offense and defensive systems and schemes. Terrace Reed, again, I don't think he has the discipline that Adama Sanogo even had his sophomore year where he averaged 14 points. Terrace Reed had the best season of his career last year coming off the bench. This is his first year starting at a legit program that's ran the right way. He started at Michigan but was playing for Juwan Howard, and we all know how that went for Michigan in the later years in Juwan Howard's tenure there. And, it's a little bit different when you're playing for something. Last year, you really had to take a seat behind Samson Johnson and learn a little bit. And I do think we're in for a really, really big year from Terrace Reed. But again, I just think I'm not saying those guys can't reach the ceilings of Hawkins, Newton, and Sanogo, but if they don't do it right away, I don't think it's fair to criticize them all too harshly. And you need something that we're going to need to see play out and develop over the course of next season. Granted, they do need to come out hot with that gauntlet of an out-of-conference schedule that they do have slated for their out-of-league play. So you definitely hope they hit the ground running with that and are able to be strong enough to come out with a win in all those games. But again, I think the depth is what's going to really, really help UConn in some of those early games where one guy might have an off night, but you got a bunch of other guys scattered all across the floor who can contribute, put some big numbers up, and lead UConn to a win. But I think that's pretty much going to take care of everything I have for this episode today. Again, I'm pretty high on the two gets between Rrezon and Yuros, but I'm curious to see how they end up fitting into the lineup and what their roles might end up being coming off the bench, I would assume, this year for the Huskies. But again, season can't come sooner. Pumped, excited. It should be a really, really successful year in STORRS, I personally believe. And until next episode, I'll see you all next time.